Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Live Like a Legend. I hope you're doing great. And today's guest is a counselling and psychotherapist, Amita Shukla. And what I wanted to get her on for was really just on the back of COVID and what's happened, but also just in general to, mental health in the world now is such a big topic of discussion, but also it's a big problem. So the more we talk about it, the more we sort of can understand it, and the more it's out in the open, the more people have to suffer less, and the better all of our mental health can be. So I'm excited to get Amita on today to talk about some of the things. And Amita specializes in working with, one-to-one with people who have depression, relationship difficulties, anxiety, stress, personal struggles, addiction, and so much more. So she really is in the thick of it, of really dealing with, people on a one-to-one basis. So in today's podcast, we talk about the importance of looking after our mental health, what we can do if we see somebody who's struggling, what we can do if we're struggling with it as well. And it's a nice, honest and open discussion. We also talk about some of the impact that social media is having on our mental health and how to really start thinking about that differently, and certainly understand how we can protect ourselves from sort of future mental health issues. So if you are listening to this and you have struggled, or you know somebody who's struggling, I think this is going to be really powerful for you. So without further ado, please welcome Amita to the podcast. Amita, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm keeping well, thank you. Thanks
Good.
a lot for having me today, Andy.
No worries.
How
I know
are
it's
you?
Sunday morning, 7:30 in the morning, so it's a great way to start the day. Sorry.
I know you've got me up early.
And it's a nice day, so now you can appreciate the day after this, can't you? Which is good.
Yeah, exactly.
So look, let's dive straight in. I'd love to just sort of get into sort of the meat of it, really. Why do you think society, it seems at the moment anyway, is struggling more with mental health than ever before? What do you think are the factors that actually contribute to that?
Well, we're social beings, and then we've had our freedom completely taken away from us. So I mean that's bound to bring up, lots of frustration, anger, lots of emotions, and it's nothing that we've been really able to prepare for.
Yeah.
So I think preparation with things can be important for us. That expectation of, things coming our way, putting things in place to get ready for it. I think for our minds, that really works well. But we haven't had any of that.
Yeah.
So I think, it's been completely new. It's been challenging. Our routines have been taken away from us, and we've had to adapt to a way of living that we've never had to experience before.
Yeah.
And then I think there's a lot of layers to this. So I think a lot of coping strategies for people have also been taken away.
Yeah.
That's, socializing with friends and family, meeting up regularly, going to the gym, things like that. I think, effective and helpful coping strategies have been completely ripped away from us. And we've, I think, had to try and find new ways. And I think for some people that can be really, really tough, especially when you don't know how else to cope with things. Things aren't familiar for you.
Yeah.
So again, that's another challenge on top of everything else. And then there's been a huge amount of loss.
Yeah.
Financially, work-related, education, huge amount of deaths, and a fear related to that, because people are, naturally anxious about loved ones, people that are vulnerable, but people that are completely healthy are still scared of what's going to happen. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty. And I mean, there's a huge amount of loss at the moment. And so people are dealing with grief, huge amount of grief. And again, that in itself is hugely, impacting. And I think people, that's hard in itself on a day-to-day basis on how to how to manage grief and things like that. So, and especially in these kind of circumstances where you can't even have funerals
Yeah.
or have to attend, I mean, I think it's really sad,
Yeah.
the way people have had to perhaps say goodbye to loved ones. There's obviously not living in a situation that's the norm for us. You know, there may be extreme feelings of loneliness for people that are on their own, but even people that may be living with other people, again, there can be a lot of loneliness in that if you don't have the right support systems in place.
Yeah.
And then, you know, a lot of stress even in relationships with partners, with families, things like that. And having to manage, you know, a way of living within enclosed spaces, I suppose. And that's bound to, again, bring up a lot of emotions.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah, I think there's also been a lot of space for people to perhaps feel or think. And I think it may be quite triggering for a lot of people. I don't speak for everyone, but I think for some, you know, experiences, negative experiences, or sad or hurtful or painful experiences may come to the surface
Yeah.
because our minds, our bodies aren't, you know, we're not as busy as we normally are. I think as a society we can keep quite busy with our lives, and again that's been taken away. So I think it's a time where I think a lot of emotions, feelings, thoughts have perhaps resurfaced from the past, and it can leave us feeling quite confused as to what's happening. There can be internal conflicts. There can be so much going on that we really don't
Yeah.
know what's happening. And I think whether it's kind of childhood experiences or whether it's more recent things or other experiences throughout life, I think it's been quite a triggering time for many people. So I think there's lots of layers to it, and I think that's why as a society there's, you know, it's going to have more impact on your mental health.
Yeah.
You know, more depression, more anxiety, you know, huge amounts of grief, you know, I think addiction as well, because again, those coping strategies that we perhaps normally have in place that might be healthier ones have been taken away. So that can lead us to perhaps going to more unhealthy habits, and perhaps find a new way of coping that perhaps isn't having a good impact on us. So I think there's so many different layers to it. You know, we're not used to dealing with that much at once.
Yeah.
So everything has really been put into the mix. And I think that's why, as a society, it's really difficult at the moment. And I think things may not surface necessarily straight away for some people. It may be months down the line, could even be years down the line, because this has been for many people quite traumatic.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's had quite a big impact.
Yeah. And it's interesting because last week the podcast that I put last week was about sort of my experience and my thoughts sort of coming out of COVID-19 and coming out the back of the sort of lockdown, if you like. And for me, I think, I mean, you know, I've been very fortunate during this time. I haven't the business hasn't necessarily suffered. I haven't lost anybody, and you know, so I've been definitely very, very fortunate with that. And reflecting on COVID last week, I actually really enjoyed the lockdown, which sounds
Yeah.
really harsh. Obviously, there's a lot of other people who were struggling with that, but I enjoyed the simplicity of getting back to just a really simple life. You know, there wasn't much to occupy. It wasn't just as chaotic as life normally is. And for me, I just felt it was so much. It was almost like a relief that, okay, I haven't got as much to think about. I haven't got as much to do. There's not as much traveling. There's not as much going, doing, and being so busy.
Yeah.
Therefore, it was almost like a holiday. Even though I was working every day, it just felt great for me mentally, personally.
Yeah.
But again, I was fortunate that I wasn't in that place of losing things really.
Yeah, and I think you're one of the lucky ones.
Yeah,
And which is a great thing. And I think for some it has been really positive to slow down their pace of life a little bit, to really get back in touch with themselves. People may be taking new routes career wise, education, and may have thought about relationships a bit differently. And I think for some it's been really positive, as you're saying.
yeah,
That's really nice to hear as well. And I think there's two sides of it. There's a really sad side, but then there's a really positive side. And I think sometimes we need to hold on to the positives that have come out of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So just thinking, sort of moving on, I suppose COVID aside, really. Um, I always think about this because I travel to the US a lot and I'm over there a lot. And therapy, your work in what you do is the norm over there. So you'll hear people say, I'm going to see my therapist this weekend, and it's just like they're going to go and see a friend. Everyone's got a therapist. They talk to somebody every week. And over here, it's obviously very different. If you said, I'm going to see my therapist this weekend, people would give you some funny looks and go, oh, what's the matter with you? There must be something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And do you see this changing here in the UK?
Okay, so I'll answer the second question first. I do think it's changing. I think what you say is absolutely right, with it being a bit more of the norm in the US, whereas here I think there's still quite a stigma attached to mental health or having a therapist. So I do think, so I'm just getting my thoughts together. Um, I do think that it is changing. I think there's a lot more awareness out there. There's so many charitable organisations now. You have Mind, you have Samaritans, Women's Aid, and I think there's a lot more, a lot more celebrities and people in the media that are talking about mental health, which I think is really important because it filters down
Yeah,
the rest of society and almost makes it a bit more normal or acceptable for everyone. So I do think it is changing here. I do think we still have perhaps a while to go. But I think that the main difference between the UK and the US is, I suppose, the meaning behind going to see a counsellor or a therapist.
yeah,
So I think, the automatic response in UK is, right, okay, the meaning is there's something wrong with you.
yeah,
And I don't think that's necessarily the case. Yes, there may be issues which are important to deal with, but I also think that, it can be just to help you become more aware of yourself, to reach certain goals you may have, to reach your full potential, whether that's in education, sports, any area of life, or just to help, relationships on your communication, interaction with people. I think it can help, increase confidence. And I think the meaning is, right, there's something wrong with you in the UK. And I think in the US, the meaning behind going to see a therapist or a counsellor is, okay, well,
yeah,
yeah, that's great. It's seen as healthy.
yeah,
And I think that's one of the reasons. I also think, so there's something called introjects. So they're internalized belief systems that we have. So we adopt them unconsciously through, the people around us, our experiences, other people's values and beliefs. We digest it as our own without kind of thinking about, right, is this what I believe? do I think differently? Do I feel differently? And it's all unconscious, and we start believing it. And I think with these introjects, the easiest way to explain it is it's all these shoulds.
Yeah.
So an example in the UK may be, okay, I'm not feeling so great. I'm finding life a bit harder now. And in the UK, maybe I should be okay. I should be able to carry on.
Yeah.
I should cope. So these are the introjects that we're carrying. So that, again, just internalized belief systems of I should. So it's really important that we catch these shoulds when they come up, because it's worth questioning and reflecting. Is this what I believe? Or is it what I've been told to believe due to my culture, the society I live in, things like that? So I think in the UK, there's lots of these negative shoulds, I should say, I suppose, around mental health and seeing a therapist or a counsellor. Whereas in US, if we have that same concept, I'm not feeling great. Life is a bit harder. Right, I should go and see a therapist.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually, just because as you're talking through this, I'm thinking about sort of my beliefs and why the stigma's attached to it, and it's sort of, I'm just getting my brain going here, and it sort of takes me back to a little bit of the golf side of things, because I'm just thinking of a few years ago, golf psychology. I mean, golf psychology over the last few years is sort of increasing. It's becoming the norm now, whereas in the past it wasn't. It wasn't the norm. So it was like, you're going to see a golf psychologist. Okay, what's wrong? What's wrong? Basically, as if you should be okay. Basically, as what you're saying there. And a lot of the golf psychologists now have changed their title from a golf psychologist to a performance coach. And
Right.
and I think, me thinking about it, maybe maybe the title of a psychotherapist might scare people off, in terms of, for me, then again, I'm talking for me now, it's like, okay, a psychotherapist, that sort of word, if you like, sounds like very, I'm trying to think of the word, I can't think of the word, but it seems very formal, it seems very, almost a little bit of a scary word, as if, okay, there must be something wrong with me if I'm going to see a psychotherapist,
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the word that was coming to me, is people get scared.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just it's some one simple word. I'm going to see a psychotherapist. Okay, what's wrong with you? And then it changes your beliefs, and then it spans out from there, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I think it's really important that the meaning that we have attached to a word is really thought about.
Yeah.
And we're not scary. We're not we're not that scary.
Do you think that all of us at some level have and struggle with mental health issues? Do you think? I mean, I think for the majority of listeners to this, everybody listening to this is into personal growth, personal development, and they want to improve. And I almost look at it as like, well, if you're, again, maybe the self-help books and the personal development side of things, years ago people would say, why are you reading a self-help book? Is there something wrong with you? Again, I think we're sort of changing, and I think we're going down a path where people are going, well, if you want to work on yourself, that's fine. It seems to be more accepted now. And this is why I think, your profession and what you do will be more accepted in the future. Do you think we all struggle with some level of mental health issues?
I think at some point in our lives, I mean, we all go through some sort of loss. You know, life happens,
Yeah.
is the best way I can put it. And I do think at some point in our lives, we all struggle, whether we have a mental health issue. I mean, I think that's a personal experience. Again, it's what you see as a mental health issue. So I think we all definitely struggle in life at some point. Sometimes may feel a little bit harder than other times, and that's okay, because you're human. I mean, we're all human. We're not robots, and things are going to feel tricky. And I think it's really important that when you know those life changes happen, or when life just seems a bit more tough, that we really take the support that's around us, whether that's family, friends, or someone like a therapist who is a bit more removed, a bit more objective. It can be really hard sometimes to talk to family, friends, and talking to a stranger. Yes, it can be hard, but it can sometimes be a little bit easier as well. Um, so I do, to answer your question, I think at some point, yes, we all struggle. But whether we go through mental health, again, I think that's mental health issues. I think that's again quite personal
Yeah.
on how we experience it or define it, I suppose.
And what do you think why do you think people struggle to talk about things like this? And when do you think is a good time that you should think, right, I need to reach out to somebody? Because we all have issues, and we all have, like you say, life happens to us. But some struggle more than others, and some would really benefit from speaking to somebody or getting almost the ball rolling in some way. What would you
Yeah.
say holds people back, and when should somebody start to reach out to someone?
Okay, I think it's really important that you trust yourself. I think it's important that you really listen to what you need, and try and filter out other people's voices
Yeah.
of all those shoulds that we just spoke about. If you should be able to get on with things, it's really important that you trust yourself and know what you need and go for it. Seek the support you need, because there's nothing wrong with that. We all, need somebody to lean on, I suppose, at some point, or to talk about things. It can be really useful. So I think when life may appear to be a little harder, um, or when there's big life changes, when you're perhaps not feeling your usual self. So when you may become a bit more withdrawn, sleeping habits may change, eating habits. You don't feel like interacting or communicating in the world, and or behaviours slightly start to change. So if you notice, or thoughts, feelings, you know, become more obvious, or feel, you're not able to cope as well. I think if coping strategies that you have in place aren't working as well as they normally do, then I think it may be time to perhaps seek a bit of support,
Yeah.
whoever that is. But I think it's important that you trust yourself.
Yeah. And if you are going to, I suppose, reach out to somebody who is going to maybe not judge you, or somebody who can just be open and honest with you and just accept you, I suppose, for who you are. So that's when the relationships around you are really important, to look out to someone who is going to give you, or listen, I suppose, more so listen to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not about, necessarily giving advice or telling people what to do. It's just about being with them and completely accepting them for who they are. And I think that's the unique thing with therapy or seeing a counsellor, is that unique relationship that you have, where you're completely accepted for who you are. There's no judgments, and you have the freedom basically to be yourself.
Yeah. And I think, just quickly thinking, I'm just thinking here, is that I think one of the things that does hold so many people back, and if anybody is listening to this who is going through a hard time, I'm sure they just have that fear of judgment, that if they speak to somebody, somebody's going to think something about them, And I think this is one barrier, isn't it? And one benefit of coming to speak to somebody like yourself, where they aren't going to get judged. They can just be as open, as honest as they can, without
Yeah.
having to worry about you judging them as a person. And it's human nature, isn't it, that that we're just a little scared of what people are going to think about us, which is
Yeah,
just, it just holds us back in so many ways.
yeah, absolutely. And it's a journey. It's, we don't expect you to tell us everything at once unless you want to. It takes time to build up that trust, that safety with somebody where you feel that you can say whatever you want or whatever you need and not be judged for it. And I think that's really important. I mean, so, sometimes we all have thoughts that we don't want to share with other people. Um, but as a therapist, we understand that, again, we're all human, and we're not there to judge. We're there to support, to help. And there's always a reason for people saying things that, may not be seen in the world as, oh, that's bad or anything. We're not there to tell them that, but really look to see what's behind that.
Yeah.
And so we're there just to make people more aware of themselves and not to judge.
So when I suppose the importance of speaking then and getting it out, if you like, getting it out in the open. What's the dangers of actually holding it in? So, if you have, you maybe not feeling good and you're
Yeah,
holding things in, and what are the dangers of holding it all in
yeah,
internally, and how is speaking about it? How does that really help?
yeah. So the way I like to, I suppose, visualize it is you have a container. So imagine in that container you're pouring in water or say even dirt or something, negative. And if there's not that little tap on the side of that container where you slowly, just help to release things a little bit, that container will just fill up, fill up, fill up to a point where it just overflows. So I think it's really important to release those thoughts, those feelings, because we can, again, it'll just build up, build up, build up to a point where perhaps then it feels too much, or then we don't know how to cope. And I think just to accept or acknowledge how we're feeling in different moments can be really, really useful. So there's this, so what we call is the cycle of experience. So the way I work anyway, each therapist works differently, or a contact cycle. So what you have there, you become aware of your needs, you act upon those needs, you satisfy that need, and you kind of withdraw and relax. So the best way I can put it is, so if you need a glass of water, for example, you're thirsty, what happens? You get thirsty. There's a need there. Right, I'm aware that I need to go get a drink now. You act upon that. So you go fetch some water. You satisfy yourself, you drink the water, and you relax because that need's been completed, that cycle's been fulfilled. So it's the same with emotions, how I see it. So if we're feeling sad, it's important that we acknowledge it, we accept it, we're aware that it's there, and we take action to think, right, what do I need? And sometimes that can be the hardest thing because we don't know what we need in those moments. And I think we sometimes can need different things at different times. Um, so becoming aware of those needs and taking action to fulfill those needs, whatever that may be. And that's where you then almost complete that cycle of, right, you satisfy that need, you meet that need, you make contact with that part of you that is feeling emotional or whatever it may be, you're feeling anger, anything. And then you kind of release.
Yeah.
Whereas if you kind of get stuck on that cycle, it it can be really tricky because then you're not dealing with the situation, you're not fulfilling a need that's there, and you're almost pushing it down, and you lose contact with yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so important to be aware and not let things build up, and actually just talk about it or act upon it. You know, think about what you can do or what that release will look like for you,
Yeah.
uh, just to help support you so things don't build up too much.
And I suppose a lot of it as well, Amita, is when you're talking about it, you know, and once it's out in the open, if you like, it becomes real.
Yeah.
And a lot of it then, I suppose, is being able to just understand you, isn't it, yourself as a person, and then okay, make sense of some of the things that you do and why you do them.
Mm,
You know, it's I suppose it's having that self awareness to go, okay, this is why I do these things, and these are the behaviors that I do, and then maybe then you have some tools and stuff that you can do. Okay, I'm going to change my behaviors when I'm feeling this way now because this is what I'm trying to meet the need of, or whatever it might be. So a lot of it, I suppose, is understanding you as a person a little more, isn't it, as well? Which we don't. I mean, some of the behaviors, as you mentioned, there's so many unconscious behaviors that we do that we don't even really think about.
yeah.
And once they're pointing out to you, once people have spoke to somebody like yourself, once these
Mm,
behaviors are pointed out, it's a bit easier then to catch yourself out and go, okay, I'm feeling a bit sad. I would normally go for a beer, for instance, maybe for somebody.
yeah.
That's not going to make me feel any better. Maybe I'll go and do something different, or maybe I'll do this. So I suppose it's the realization, isn't it, on some of the patterns that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what we do. So I work quite holistically. With the mind, with the body, holistic responses, somatic responses to things. So it's really just getting in touch with who you are a bit more. And each person's different, and each person will, be behaving in different way. We all have different patterns. So it's just becoming aware of those patterns, those unconscious processes that we have, and sometimes becoming a bit more conscious or being a bit more aware of those processes can be really tricky. It can be hard to accept that that's what we do,
Yeah.
but we all do them. And I think it's when we have the awareness, then we can almost ask ourselves or challenge ourselves to perhaps do things differently if we want to. We all cope in the best way we can. So even if somebody is reaching out for a beer or, unhealthy behaviours, they're coping in the best way they know how. But I think the awareness really, I think you end up kind of really challenging yourself. And that's what we do is we notice and we see, and we're trained to, you know what these unconscious patterns may be or processes may be. And they can be through what happens to your body somatically, what you're saying, what you're feeling. And we really just reflect back those to help you to become more aware, and also almost kind of figuring out what's your true identity as well. So again, undoing or untangling all those introjects, and really again just getting in touch with you and what you believe and kind of what's your moral compass or values, and just it's about becoming more of who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're just going to move on to social media, because I think it's
Yeah.
important that we talk about social media in today's world, because it's so prevalent in everybody's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
How much do you think social media is impacting people's mental health? And I suppose it's still early days, but what are the things that you see that, or how it affects people, basically?
Okay, so I think it is impacting people, especially perhaps the younger generation, a bit more. People that perhaps are trying to still define their sense of self or figure out who they are. I think perhaps when you're a bit older, you may know a little bit more, but again, that may not be the case. Um, so I think it's impacting people because I think there's this sense of perfectionism. I think, even when you're scrolling, there can be a lot of images on there that you see that may not make yourself, you may not feel good looking at them. So I think it's really important that you look at your self-talk.
Yeah.
So tape that's going on in your head that's repeating or saying things that may not be your true belief system, but because you're looking at something, you can start thinking, right, I should look like this, or I should be also taking these types of pictures. And I think our self perceptions can be perhaps distorted. And I think that social media, therefore, can have quite a big impact. I think it can be very useful if it's used correctly. But if it's not, then I think it can almost, so we can have our real self. There's a real self, and I think then there's this false identity that we create. And I think that perhaps looking at social media, things have been photoshopped, hundreds of pictures may have been taken to produce that one picture. And I think it's not the reality of what's happening. I think everybody has flaws. And I think we start comparing ourselves and almost thinking we need to be that way. So this real self that we may hold we start to move away from that, and create this false identity, because I mean, we all want to be accepted, we all want to be liked, we all, want to feel part of society and feel like we fit in. Because if we don't, then I mean that can come at a cost as well. So we almost create this false identity and move further and further away from perhaps who we are, or what we believe. And I think the further we move away from ourselves, I think that's where a lot of depression, anxiety, a lot of confusion and internal conflicts start to arise. So I think that's how social media is having an impact on us, because we're creating this false identity. And it's all, I think a lot of the perception is that life is great.
Yeah, for everybody else.
Yeah, for everybody else, but why not me?
Yeah.
When that's not the reality. So I think it's really important that we rationalize things. But it's so easy to get, swooped into that. So I think being aware of our self-talk. So as we're scrolling, if we start to notice that, right, I'm starting to feel bad about myself now, I think then it's important that you, I suppose, take control and take power over it, whether that's limiting your usage, whether it's using a different device that you don't carry around with you. I think there are things that you can put into place to try and control it, rather than, perhaps social media controlling you. So I think it's really important that you think, is this having a healthy impact on me, or a negative, or a negative one? And I think, so I think that's why it's having an impact on us, and I think that's how it's having an impact on us.
Yeah, and I think it's so early, isn't it, in terms of where social media, it hasn't been around that long still. So I think we yet to see some of the real impact it has on us as human beings. I think to sort of, I suppose my parents, they've grown up watching TV and they've watched the news, and you see maybe the impact that has on them over a long period of time, from an emotional and I suppose mental aspect. And I'm always thinking, well, okay, look, social media is, for me, it's like almost it's the new TV. It's, how's this going to be impacting us in 15, 20 years time? And what are the things that we can do now to protect ourselves from, this having a negative impact on our life? And I was listening to a book recently called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, and it just talks about social media and technologies, how they're just basically exploiting our human vulnerabilities, because they want us using the platform so much, and that's where they make money and things like that. So, we are being exploited by these businesses because they want us to be on there, and our as much willpower as you got, they're the power that they have using these vulnerabilities is a lot stronger than our willpower. So it's tough, isn't it? It's tough.
It absolutely, it really is. And it becomes a habit that sometimes we can go onto the app and we don't even realize, and then it may take us a moment to think, oh, I've just clicked on that, and it becomes so habitual,
Yeah.
that to catch ourselves can be really tough. And that's why I say perhaps use a different device. So one that you may not look at as much, or one that you may leave at home. So when you're out and about, don't look on social media or have that app. And I think it's really about creating ways that work for us. And I think that's really what we need to do is take control of it. But as you say, it's really hard.
It is. It is. It is hard, and it's like you say, it's still new. There's lots to come from it, I'm sure, but we're all trying to figure it out, aren't we, as we go, I suppose. Trying
Yeah,
to use it for as best as we can, but at the
yeah,
same time, I think we have to be aware of the negative impacts later down the line, don't we? That we're not necessarily aware of now.
absolutely. Because I think you know, our unconscious processes, as we look at social media, it's feeding us, I suppose. So, the outcome of that you may not see that until years down the line, because it can take years and years of this feeding us for it to build up and almost become our belief system or change the way we are. So again, I think you're absolutely right. We don't know the impact of it fully yet.
What are the daily or the weekly things that we can do that can have a real sort of positive impact on our mental health? And what are the things that we should be avoiding as well?
Okay, so I think self-care is has to be top of the list. Whether you do that weekly, daily. I mean, me personally, I try and incorporate some form of self-care every single day, whether that's, even if it's 20 minutes of doing something that's for me, something that I enjoy, something that brings me that feeling of peace or contentment or whatever it is you want to call it. And I think self-care has to be a priority. And I think in our society, we don't perhaps do that as much. So that self-care can be different for different people. It can be reading a book, it can be going to the gym, it can be socializing, it can be listening to music, it can be a range of things. And I think it's important that we, again, think about what do we need that day and incorporate what we need that day if we can, as a way of providing ourselves with some self-care, because even that short 10 minutes, 20 minutes can really lift you and have a positive impact on you. So I think, these things that perhaps form some sense of mindfulness, where we're present in the moment. I know we can get carried away with our thoughts, our feelings, and again, we're human, we all do it. So I think for me, I think self-care
Yeah.
has to be a priority, and it can be different things in different moments.
And how do we figure that out? So, for instance, if I'm just trying to think of somebody who's listening to this and they think, well, what do I like to do? How do they figure out that for themselves if they're not sure what self-care is, if that makes sense? So what's what's the strategy for them to figure that out? What's going to have a positive effect on them?
Yeah, something that brings you a sense of excitement, perhaps, a sense of pleasure, contentment, or some form of peace. I think anything that makes you feel good. I think it's important that you do those things. And I know some of those things may be unhealthy. and it's really important that we try and perhaps look at healthy things.
Yeah.
And again, we're all doing the best we can. So if we do go into unhealthy behaviors, we're just doing what we feel is right in that moment. But it's important that we think of what may be good for us, what may be healthy for us, that will have a bit more of a lasting impact on our mental well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And I suppose one final or maybe two final things.
Uh-huh.
How can we tell if somebody else is maybe going through a hard time? What are the things that we could maybe looking out for in our friends? Because I think that's important as well, not necessarily just us,
Yeah.
our friends as well. If somebody else is going through a tough time, what are the signs that maybe you can look out for, and what can we do in order to sort of check up and make sure they're okay, or things like that as well?
Yeah. So I think it's quite similar to knowing within yourself how if you're experiencing mental health issues. You may see it in someone else. They may withdraw. They may, not socialize as much or communicate with you as much. There may be changes in behaviors. Personality changes. You may start to notice some differences in the way they're being, which isn't the norm for them. There could be a form of addiction that may not have been there before. You're not able to engage with them as well. You may notice that they're starting to feel they're a bit lower in mood, perhaps, or starting to get anxious or worry about things where before they may not have. So really noticing these little changes in people, as you would with yourself. And I think it's about communicating honestly.
Yeah.
So perhaps asking them very, very openly, very honestly, is something wrong? And it's okay to do that. And I think sometimes we don't. We may assume, that there's someone else that's, checking up on them, or they'll be okay. But I think it's really important that we kind of open communication and just be very honest and say, I've noticed these changes in you, and perhaps make them aware of the changes that you see,
Yeah.
and ask them, are you okay?
Yeah.
Do you need help? And I think being real is the best way, and being open and honest.
Yeah, it's interesting just because I just think about it, actually, just thinking about this part here, is that maybe last year, 18 months ago, I was going through a little bit of a tough time, and it was almost, I was at a point where I was like, I really want somebody to ask me how I am in a nice way. I didn't want to sort of make that first move, if that makes sense. But it was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I almost needed, okay, I wish somebody else would just say to me, how are you? Because then I could have actually sort of let it out. So I think it's a really important part, isn't it, to think about it. Somebody isn't always going to come to you, are they? And somebody who is going through maybe a tough time, they might just need that question, look, how are you? Because normally we ask how you are, how you doing. The answer is just, yeah, I'm great, thanks. Yeah, how are you? But it's a flippant comment, isn't it? But if you have a real sincere, how are you doing? Look, really how you doing? You might get a different response, I suppose. But it's not waiting to make that first move from somebody else. It's maybe looking, thinking, well, this might be something they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're in it, it can be really hard to reach out, and just having someone perhaps notice you or see you and genuinely ask, how are you? In that sincere way can make all the difference. You can almost kind of just feel free
Yeah,
and think, yes, somebody's asking me. And I think it's really important that we do that.
yeah, brilliant. Well, Amita, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me today, Andy.
It's been great to have you on the podcast and share that. Look, I think with this podcast, I think none of us live a perfect life, and we all go through through a real roller coaster of stuff. So I think the more that we can talk about these things, and the more we can make this, I think what is it in the UK? I think it must be in the UK. It's okay to be not okay. I think the more we can make that more normal and have people open up and have people talk about things and have your profession be a more of a normal thing and an okay thing to go and seek out help and advice, then I think obviously everyone's going to be in a better place, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to make it the norm and see that it's okay, whether you're struggling or whether you just want to learn about yourself. It's okay to see a therapist.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Sunday morning, you can go and enjoy the day in the sun now.
Thank you very much, Andy. I will do.
Cheers, Amita.
Thanks a lot. Bye.